No, if you need to.
I guess I'll get started. My name is Sarah Danziger. I'm the educational coordinator here, and right now you're at the Center of Photography at Woodstock, which is now in Kingston. So um, you probably want to know when we're going to change our name, and we also want to know that. But this is the second home of CPW. We were in Woodstock for, I don't know if you're familiar, but 45 years. This has sort of been a home to us for the last two, and it'll be another year. But some very exciting news last week. CPW closed on a house, or sorry, on a building over at 25 Dederick Street, which is about a block from here, and it's quite a bit bigger. So if you feel cozy now, it'll get a little bit better in the future. We're really excited here. This is our Meet the Artist. It's every Thursday. We bring out a local or visiting lens-based artist. We're really very lucky to have Tanya Marcuse here. And I'm going to read a little bit about Tanya, and then I'll let her take the mic. Tanya began making photographs as an early college student at Bard College at Simon's Rock. She went on to study art history and studio art at Oberlin and earned her MFA from Yale. Her photographs are in many collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the George Eastman Museum. In 2012, she received a Guggenheim Fellowship to pursue her project, Undergarments and Armor. Tanya is a student of martial arts and boxing as a method of cultivating mental and physical concentration and discipline. Tanya's books, Undergarments and Armor, Wax Bodies, and Fruitless, Fallen, Woven, and Ink. Sorry, I said that funny. Anyway, she teaches photography at Bard College, and if you're interested, she has some of these books in the back here for sale. So definitely reach out to her afterwards and get a beautiful copy. All right, thank you.
It's really nice to, I'm excited about this new version of CPW. I had some work in a show at the CPW in Woodstock on Tinker Street in 1991, just after graduating from Yale. And so the place has been on my radar as a really vital center for photography and community, right? Not just exhibitions and everything, but really bringing people together who love the medium. So I also want to thank Brian for inviting me tonight, and for Sarah and Nick and Nicole and Adam, all the staff that like pulls this all together. So tonight, actually, it's interesting. I talk about my work a fair amount, but I don't often speak about work which is not fully resolved, right? And so I felt like the title of this series, Meet the Artist, was an opportunity to, in a way, like let go of the idea that something has to be pulled to a point of completion the way that I would expect it to be of myself for a show or a book, and instead kind of share where I'm at with some things which are loose ends, which are still unresolved, things I'm wrestling with, things I'm really excited about my new work, which is called Book of Miracles. I thought I would actually begin this. I started here with stopped, but it's supposed to be going. But maybe if I go to the next, yeah, that's okay. I thought I would circle back. So this is actually 2005. And I won't get too stuck, hopefully, in the past, but I wanted to kind of give us a framework to think about, and myself a framework for the way in which there are methods, ideas that are totally central to the work. Some things have really, really shifted in methodology and idea, and some things are really, really continue. So I think that that's kind of, I don't know, again, for a kind of meet the artist, I think our evolution, artistic evolution, is an extraordinary thing, and I think living subjectively in that and through that has been one of the most amazing things about being an artist. The way that you're working on one thing and then you sort of feel the ground shifting under your feet, and something, either a perspectival shift or something happens, and it it's a true epiphany. And sometimes it's kind of scary and thrilling. So this is from Fruitless, which is a series. I seem to work in 5-year periods. This was a project where I photographed apple trees in the area where I live, in the Hudson Valley. I live 1 mile from Bard. But I should maybe just mention that before this, I had spent about 15 years working on work that centered on the body and the archive. So this, in fact, was a huge shift. And I kept it a bit secret for a while that I was photographing trees, because I felt there was something a little embarrassing about it, because I was kind of thinking about my other work in this very sort of theoretical way. And I was like, trees, are they theoretical? I don't know. So, but I persisted, which is, I think, one of the most important things that we artists can do, is to persist and persevere and trust. So even when you don't necessarily know what you're doing, you continue working, and that kind of helps to, that's what leads the way. I'm just wondering if can it be a little bit darker? I'm just thinking that these will be easier to see. So you can see that these are in black and white. These were made with film, with a 4x5 view camera. The tree is almost always in the exact center, in this very kind of almost typological way, kind of iconic. And then I often photographed the same tree in different seasons over many years, and often, or sometimes, until the death of the tree. A subtext of this work, which I think sort of runs through all of the work, has to do with the natural world or open spaces in peril. So all of these trees were in orchards that were in land that was for sale. So there was another dimension to this project, which is that I felt I was memorializing something that would inevitably be lost, which may in fact be true of all photographs, right? Or maybe not all. I feel like we were talking about this in my class this week about the difficulty of generalizing about photography, that there's so many photographies that there's really almost nothing you can say about the medium that pertains to, all of it. But in any case, that was what was really on my mind, a kind of like the photograph as a kind of existential memorial of something that would be lost. Then I did have one of those moments where everything changed, where I had been going out and really searching for these particular moments. It seems very, very simple, but in terms of just the vantage point of being able to kind of photograph the tree like a portrait, with the horizon very low, as if it's alone, when in fact it's really quite crowded in an orchard. That's always what I was looking for. I was always sort of seeking that out, that kind of special vantage point, and a way of using the lens to kind of draw the tree into the foreground in relationship to me and to the viewer. And then one day I started looking down at the ground. And I know this sounds like, you almost sound like a fool when you say something like this, because it's like, wow, you looked at the ground. But it was a really big moment, because it was almost like a shift in genre from landscape to still life. And actually from this point on, the horizon basically left my work for almost, I don't know, till recently. So this is maybe 2013, 13 or so, 12. And so probably dropped out. Yeah, for the horizon's been gone for a long time, but appears here and there in the new work. There are many more photographs here that I'm not showing you. So this is just kind of like touching down at these transitional moments. So another enormous transitional moment was this one, where I had been working on another project abroad, a series called Wax Bodies, still working with the body in the archive while this other work was taking place back home. And I had moved to color in that work. So I had just the intuition to photograph these still lifes in color. And so I made this frame both in black and white, and then the same frame in color. And then basically from this point on, I work in color. And I think I have almost like, maybe this is again very, very simple, but I had a very kind of like Dorothy and Oz relationship to color. I think I still have that. I had worked in black and white for so many years. I really never thought I would work in color. I felt like I just had such a strong relationship to black and white. And then the viscerality of color, the magic of it, and I think too its potential for allegory in a way that's a little bit different than black and white, maybe. I always feel like I have to qualify everything because I don't know. I feel like almost so many things you could look at it from a different way and wonder about it. And the other piece was that I was so interested in just the spectacle of decay that the descriptive quality of the color could do something for me that that black and white could not. So this is now, I'm in Fallen, and I'm on the ground, and I'm working out in the landscape. And you'll see this again in the new work, where in part 2 of my new series, I'm out in the landscape, but then staging scenes in places that I've kind of scoped out. So here I'm in a nearby swamp, but I'm carrying with me, you know, bins of frozen apples and flowers and other things that I collect. Many of you know and have even contributed greatly to my collection of various things, ranging from allium seed pods, birds, animals, things like that. And actually, I will just say as an aside, or I don't know whether it's an aside, but that the animals and the birds and things that you'll see, they've been found by, you know, friends or things that I've found. Usually they're killed by cars. Some of them are could possibly endangered species. And so I try to keep careful notes about where they were found, because I know that this is also like part of the ethics of what's happening to the natural world. In Fallen, this is so much for me about weaving together the kind of different realms that, you know, like in Hieronymus Bosch, who will appear later in the talk, right? There's hell, and there's like the lusty earth, and then there's paradise. And at one time I was so into Dante and into Bosch that I thought I was going to make some kind of like super grandiose 3-part series. And instead, I've always been interested in intermingling those, that emotionally it didn't ring true to me to separate out those realms, that so much of life seems that it's more about the way that there's an all-at-onceness to extraordinary beauty, extraordinary pain, loss, and the cycles of life and death. And so in working this way, I also was able to, I think, harness some of the ways that photographs are believable or seem to be believable, but then to create something that's really fictional. So, you know, there's spring shoots coming out of the ground, but then the apples are decaying. There's a snake over here, of course, right? And a bat. So it's the landscape that I'm picturing is really one that is the post-lapsarian one after the fall, right? So this is like picturing Adam and Eve have been expelled, they're gone, no one's there to tend the garden. And so there's all this like excess opulence, excess rot that is true at the same time. My favorite, Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden and the terrible shame accompanied with that. I really relate to that. I don't know. Can you see okay? Do you want? I think one thing, I occasionally you'll see some pictures of me working just because, I often, I talk about the word immersion a lot, and I want to bring some sense of immersion in the natural world to the viewer, especially in the really large works. Immersion is like such an important part of it. But experientially for me, working is intensely, intensely physical. And I would even say like sometimes torturous, but also really ecstatic. And I know that this person knows exactly what I feel like. There's lots of people here who actually know what I mean. Just this past weekend, I was out photographing, nearly got frostbitten hands, could not make myself stop. It's a kind of like I said to my husband when I came home, and I was like, in my hands were hurting so much, I was almost crying. And it's almost like a red shoes feeling where you cannot make you cannot stop. And it's really powerful, but also kind of tiring. I picked this one to reiterate from the earlier work because the egg and the symbol of the egg and the eggshell has remained so important in my work. And in fact, some of these very same eggshells have appeared in the most recent large work that I just made, because I'll just save things and reuse them, maybe paint them, burn them, but then I try to like save them from a piece and have them take on another life. A lot of my work is in conversation with other works of art in a way that I find very, very helpful. It gives me a kind of foundation. So this is looks like a Bosch, but it's really Bruegel pretending to be Bosch. And it's the fall of the rebel angels, which is like an amazing story, right? Where the angels defy God, get seduced by Satan, and then the archangel Michael is, sending them to hell. And then the painting captures the moment when they're like transmogrifying into these like horrible creatures. So that whole like sense of transformation, I found super powerful. And this happened to be the summer 2013 of the cicadas. I'm sure many of you remember that. So it was like really beautiful, really wild, really science fiction, kind of also strange smell, right? Do you remember that weird smell? And the sound. So I was working with the cicadas a lot, and I felt like their wings had that a kind of quality of the angels, but then they had these little like red demon eyes, that were so much like the devil. In terms of scale, the pieces that we're looking at now, like this last piece, is the largest one from Fallen, 62 by 75. The other ones are more like 40 by 50, sometimes a little smaller. But at that time, I began to intuit that I wanted to work more with capturing the viewer's peripheral vision and how I might be able to do that. What you're not seeing here between the last slide and this one is about a year of trial and error, and a project that really never came into being. I actually remember Portia Munson and Sharon Kaur coming to my studio. I was working on a project called Last Suppers, where I had saved an entire year of leftovers, family leftovers, in a freezer, and was composing these kind of tableaux out on the bank in my yard. It just never really quite came together. But through all the trial and error of trying to make that happen, developing this strong relationship to The Last Supper and its iconography, and the fact that that painting is 1:2 aspect ratio, and thinking that I wanted to have something that was sort of flatter and more even and a little more controlled. And so eventually I ended up building this frame that's underneath a big tent that's in my backyard. And I thought it was going to be super temporary, like for maybe a month or two, and I would make one piece. I rented my first tent, and then since that time I had someone weld for me a frame made of 2 tons of steel so I can work all year round. So it's become like really a really important part of my process. I keep bins and bins of my collected material out there, and then I compose on the frame. This is actually an earlier version of a frame, so the frame has had some different iterations, much like I think of it kind of like a garden bed. And its depth, right, in the photographs, I'm trying to suggest depth, but its depth is not that deep. It's like an oxymoronic, like shallow depth kind of thing. And so, and these would take some time, right? So some of them would take 2 weeks, some of them would take 2 months to compose. And one of the most exciting things about that is the change that would occur during the time that I was working. Some things I would panic and be like, oh, Jesus, that's done. That's, you know, but then something else would happen. So in this one, this is woven number 1. This was a piece where usually there's sort of an idea that's at the core of each piece. This one had to do with the kind of seduction of the natural, right? Of cherries, of flowers. But throughout the piece are like many, 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 many snakes, still so centered on Eden and this idea of the proliferation of the snakes, right? There's no longer one snake. There's many, many snakes. And then, so this is a piece that's composed on the frame. And then my method shifts because I'm no longer using the 4x5 view camera. I start using a digital camera and making somewhere between 30 and 50 frames in 3 rows, and then stitching them together in post-production. On this like technical shift, of course, makes everything look different, right? This was something we were talking about in class on Tuesday, right? The way that the technical, the conceptual, and the visual, these things you hope are firing kind of on all cylinders. Not every work of art has it's not 30-30-30, right? It's like there's different ways of sort of allocating those things, but you want them to all come together into one whole thing. And I think one of the things I loved about, and I still work this way, is that like a little stick on like the lower right-hand corner can be described with the same level of kind of respect and intensity as something in the center of the frame. Whereas if you look, a lot of you are photographers here, so right, the middle of the lens always looks like amazing, and then sometimes things around the side don't look so great. The other thing that was different is time, right? So instead of it being a single moment, it's not as if I'm really like a decisive moment kind of photographer, but still the trees are single moments. That's one moment, whether it's 1/125th of a second or a longer exposure, it's still really one moment. Whereas this, even if it's photographed over like a shoot, is like a whole day. And then to make all the different frames, obviously I don't want to like make one frame at 9 o'clock and the other at 5 o'clock. So that's kind of a consolidated thing, but it becomes a kind of a collection, a gathering together of many moments and many perspectives, because the camera is moving, right? It's not staying in one place. It's not static. It's on a tripod at the top of my scaffold, and then it's moving across. So it becomes a kind of collection of views, which what my hope is then that it kind of has a sort of flatness, not unlike abstract expressionism or tapestry, that has a relationship also between close and far, I love looking at things like that, where you look at something from far away and then it pulls you in really close. And even the things that don't invite me in, I'm always right up there looking to see what it looks like up close. So I feel like the detail of the pieces has to be really, really rigorous and luscious. I don't want ever someone to move in close to something and be like, oh, like it. I really want it to be like, oh, wow, like, oh, like this piece. I feel like different pieces sort of I would think of as challenging me in new ways. This one had to do with working with somewhat larger scale objects, not having everything so jammed in together, and also creating these little pools on the frame that I built out a bit so that I could fill with water. Another thing that was different was that I was working more with living creatures rather than dead. So I used live frogs that I borrowed briefly from the swamp at Montgomery Place, and then actually had someone bring them straight back, because all they had to do is appear in their one frame, right? They don't have to sit around for the whole shoot. They were misted and everything. But amazing to have these living creatures, in the work. Is there another frog in there? Oh, no. And actually, Carol is here, which is so nice, because Carol made for me, Carol Wooden, who's over here. She's like the most astonishing botanical illustrator like in the world. And when I had my show at the George Eastman House called Woven, I was really excited about viewers engaging with the work, not just sort of as this like purely fine art thing, but they have beautiful gardens there, and a lot of people visit because of the gardens, but through the lens to some extent of the natural world. And I've always loved the keys, the legends in the Natural History Museum that kind of tell you where everything is. So I worked with Carol and a botanist at Bard to label these the species as best we could, and this was hung beside the piece as a kind of invitation into the piece that was a little bit different. The other piece of this, and I feel like I have to move on because I'm getting too long-winded. I don't know whether you can see these in here, but it really began with this piece had to do with like metamorphosis. So throughout the piece are little chrysalids, monarch chrysalids that I raised, collected monarch eggs, then raised, remember that, hon? Raised the monarchs, and then had them in various stages in the piece, either from as chrysalids, as caterpillars, and that was, even though they're tiny in the piece, felt really, really important. Also a really nice moment, hard to see in this perhaps, but where this stinkhorn mushroom, a little fly landed on the top of it right at the moment of the frame. Seasons, this was like the first winter piece that I made, truly wintry piece. My husband is here, by the way, James Rahm, the writer, and he's really like, he knows this work more than anybody because he helped me drag icicles out of Bard Falls in a laundry basket and helped me to lash them to the frame with his fishing line. I'm going to just move a little more because I want to get to the new work. Towards the end of Woven, I was more interested in foregrounding life. Not always feeling like everything had to be so dead. And this, in fact, everything is alive, but I couldn't resist also making another version of it after the flowers had died and I had completely torched them. So this is also where I begin kind of making versions that I think these work in conversation. In Book of Miracles, I'm not convinced yet about sometimes when I have versions. But I think of that one just like this, right? This sort of medieval memento mori, where you have the fecundity on one side and death on the other. One last piece from Woven, Woven number 33, which is a piece that has also live creatures, live owls. And I have this image of one of the habitat dioramas from the Natural History Museum, just because that's become and became, the diorama just became such an important point of conversation for me. Also a place where I get all sorts of ideas and materials and even methods. Like I wrote to someone there about how they make their fake snow, and I copied them totally in that last piece, although I also had real ice as well as fake ice. But this idea of having this sort of, the diorama having this whole complicated relationship to the natural world. On one hand, so responsible for many, 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 many acres of conserved land. And at the very same time, complete like imperial plunder. And this person, one of the taxidermists, Charles Akeley, had a very famous, maybe you know about it, kind of nervous breakdown on the expedition to collect the gorillas, where he was like, just suddenly had just an existential crisis about what he was doing, you know, because of course they shot them. And then he actually changed the course of his life. He ended up working on making films. So there's several other woven pieces I made after this, but this is the last one that I'm going to show you. And it was really thrilling. I worked with these two rescue owls that I had met a few years earlier because I brought some owls to my class as visiting artists instead of a guest, because I felt like the students sort of needed a jolt of wonder. It was really, really fun. We should do that again. You guys weren't there for that, right? Yeah. So this is, on the top is Leo, and then down here is Linus. They both, where's Linus? They can't be released into the wild because they, where is Linus? Sorry. Maybe I don't have Linus. Linus is down here. Linus is blind in one eye, so can't hunt. And Leo has a broken shoulder, so he also can't hunt. But the methods here too, where I'm like, there's many, many frogs in this one. I was a little worried that they were going to get eaten by the owls. I got a little better at making water, making the illusion of water. I got hip to a YouTube channel that had all kinds of cool stuff. And so I started using Elmer's clear glue for my little designed stream here. And then I made this book, Fruitless Fallen Woven, for which I have one copy tonight. I didn't have more than that, but if anybody wants it, with this 3-part series that pulled together these 3 projects. So finally, then, right, we all know what happened in March of 2020, right? Learning how to teach remotely. I mean, it was everything. That's the least of it. I don't even know why I mentioned that one first. It's just like, you know, that was, I think everybody lived through this in different ways, but I had another one of those moments where there was just a really intense shift in the work that happened pretty suddenly. I was actually continued my training in the living room and was jumping around doing some ridiculous like martial arts thing. And I looked at this facsimile of the Book of Miracles that my husband had given to me several years before. And I stopped what I was doing and I started looking at the book. And I just knew that was like what I was going to be doing. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but it was what I was going to be doing. So if you don't know the Book of Miracles, it's a extraordinary text from the 16th century from Augsburg. That is a kind of, it's almost like documentary photography of manuscript illumination and paranormal phenomenon, meaning that there's images that are accompanied by text, which are about the documenting the evidence of miracles. Not so much in this case to prove that they exist, but to create a kind of like compendium of miracles, biblical miracles, astronomical miracles, generally not the way we think of a miracle, like, oh, he was saved, she was saved, more like it rained blood for 40 days and everybody died kind of miracles. And the text is actually kind of incredible. This is the year 1009, 1009 years after the birth of Christ. The sun was darkened and the moon appeared entirely bloody, and a great earthquake struck. And with a great crash, an enormous burning torch, like a tower or column, fell from the sky. After this, there was a famine in Germany and Italy, and more people died than were left alive. It's more like that. Here's just a few more images from that. 1126 years after the birth of Christ, the winter was so harsh and cold that the birds froze in midair. After this came such hunger that many people starved, and birds in the air killed one another. I think I have to read this one too. So this is part one of the new work. And the first thing that happened in my process is that I weeded my frame and I blackened it. And I felt like I needed something that was going to suggest a much deeper space than the kind of space that I was suggesting before. It didn't feel like a garden anymore. And I wanted there to be the possibility that on the frame there could be a kind of convergence of sky, of ground, of underwater. At least this is what I'm thinking about. This is the first piece in the series. So these are the same scale as woven. So these are 62 by 124 inches. And my methods also really had to shift because I was used to having at least some help making these especially when I was shooting. And of course you couldn't be with anyone. My son Jonah got pretty good at helping me actually photographically and in many other ways. I learned to photograph them on my own in a way that's really, really challenging. I don't mean I didn't know how. I mean, like, it's really hard to be going up and down the scaffold and also like making sure the light, there's like a million things going on. And then another really big thing happened is that the things that I'm using from the natural world, I'm changing more. I mean, I was always using paint and fire and things like that, but I started painting things gold, and they're not really what they were anymore. The seed pod is still a seed pod, but it transforms in this new context. And then someone pointed out to me this. Almost all of the big pieces were made during some kind of event that felt relevant to me psychically somehow. This was the comet Neowise. I did not make this picture. And other influences, like shortly before the pandemic, I was able to actually study this manuscript in person at the Beinecke Rare Book Library. Some of you probably know it, the Voynich manuscript. It's become very famous. People think it's like magical. It is. But just this whole like kind of celestial alchemical world felt suddenly really real to me. Like I'd always been really compelled by all of this material. I think I had always basically been a catastrophist. So it's a really weird thing. Like it's almost like some kind of riddle, like what happens when you're a catastrophist, but then you're in a catastrophe. like what happens. Like, I don't not know if I have an answer to that, but it was strange. This is number 2 from the series. And honestly, right now I have the most mixed feelings about this piece, since I was saying how I was going to be all honest with you about that, or maybe I didn't say I was going to be honest, but just to share some of these questions, these artistic questions, because I think more and more as the work has unfolded, what feels really important is that they're not like too pinned down. And this idea that on the frame is this picture. And even if there's all kinds of weird things going on, like the ground is the sky, a dahlia petal is a flame, right? I still feel like there might be a little less room for the viewer. Like that maybe it's just a little tight. On the other hand, it also was the first time I had a horizon, right? Even though it's a fake one. And it reminded me actually of like the kind of childlike wonder when you're like a little kid and you're making something and you kind of hold your crayon like this and you draw in circles to make something. This is kind of what it reminded me of. So here it is kind of composed on the frame. I feel like that's sort of weird, like how it looks like that. Because I think when you look at it like this, you know, maybe you're thinking about like, is this, you know, what does this have to do? How is this a photograph or something like that? And I think for me, ultimately, it's still so much about the translation of the world into the language of the photograph. So even if it's a thing that I messed with and composed, it's still, that is like at the operational center of the thing, is translating it into the photographic language. Here's a few little behind the scenes images of the studio and what was, you know, I painted some of my daughter's hair gold. You can see some of that in maybe you can see it, like in some of these little sort of celestial bodies have hair wrapped around them. The amanita mushrooms I found in my compost, just as I was thinking that that ground needed like a few little bright highlights to kind of pull the viewer's eye along. And of course, I love working with like something like mushrooms where it could be like super, super deadly or super delicious, right? Like that, those things that have like that automatic kind of duality. A lot of people gave me allium seed pods. Raina, didn't you give me some? Raina gave me some. Yeah. I still have a lot of them. And my son Jonah, let's see if this works. Oh, I forgot this is. So he's helping me paint about 300 moths gold here. This is before he went to Bard, so he doesn't look quite as hip. Yeah. That was a funny thing where you see that little box that he has of all those moths. Actually, someone at Radius Books who I was chatting with, we were trying to sort of stay connected, was saying how they had this horrible moth infestation. So it's like, oh, like, so she sent them to me. And that was really great. See. And then this is the piece on the wall it was just in a show in DC last year. But I put that in just because I sort of wanted to remind us of like the way the thing lands as an object, like sort of starts as an object, goes into the language of photography, and then is also then becomes an object. I'm often thinking about how much I want to suggest or not the world in the photograph continuing beyond the boundaries of the frame. So how much is it sort of structured in a way that kind of points inward or points outward? So this is one where I really wanted to sort of have a sense that at least on the sides, this was something that kind of pushed pushed outward. This one is a little less like that, a little bit more enclosed. And this was exciting because I never thought, oh, the color looks weird. I never thought I would really have an opportunity to work with these giant caribou antlers that were also a gift. Someone who worked in the Arctic as a scientist had given them to my son, who gave them to me. And so I don't know what I was going to say about this, but you can see that there's a lot of mushrooms. There's this root ball, which is kind of like literally the heart of the piece, painted red and then soaked in that Elmer's clear glue that I love to have it sort of feel like it's really kind of alive. Some particularly crazy methods of collecting mushrooms and then making templates for them so that I could paint just the edges of the cap gold, because they had these particular mushrooms have this beautiful kind of bluish color, and using the vines to kind of pull your eye, a kind of across to basically, because if the thing is about this intense kind of interconnectivity in the natural world, and hopefully with us, with me, the vines are like a really important way of kind of pulling everything together. So some of the vines are gold, some are painted partly red, some are their natural color, and then the background is this kind of it's actually not that color blue, but much darker than that, is this blue. This is one where there's a different another version with fire, and I haven't decided yet quite what I want to do with that, whether they speak to one another and converse and enrich one another, or if they kind of cancel each other out a little bit. I think at this point, I kind of prefer the one without the fire, but yeah, so that's an open question. That's an open question. And I think there might be ways that I could work with it. Like in a book sequence, you just separate them and maybe the book ends here, right? I don't think they should be probably in such close proximity. Things like that. This is another one where it was very exciting to make, and you can see the reiteration of those 3 golden orbs that were in the Book of Miracles, and also all the birds. So this is sort of like a merger of 2 of the paintings from the Book of Miracles, the one where the birds all freeze and fall to the ground, and then the one with the 3 orbs. The orbs are made mostly of turmeric and sumac and other like just spices that I had around. The birds were painted before they were placed. Tricky to compose because I can't leave the birds on the frame. So I would kind of compose them, then have a number that corresponded to the bird, on the bird and on the frame. And then they'd go back in the freezer until the day that I would photograph them. This, you'll see this a few more times again, but as I'm working, I'll make sometimes just not with the whole fancy stitching method. I'll just make a really simple, either using my phone or a 24 millimeter lens, just something to capture the whole thing and then print it out on just crappy letter paper on a crappy setting, just to see it as a picture, right? To get it away a few steps removed from the world so I can sort of assess it as a picture. And actually, when I did that, it got a little beat up since then. I just recently found it in the tent. But at the time, it actually is what made me make a change, because that what I was talking about this thing about resolution and it being like a picture and maybe not having as much room in there or sort of mystery. So I painted over the orbs and brought the white down into the landscape below, the landscape below. And I prefer this one now. And again, I don't know what will happen to the other one. So I usually avoid the center, but I decided that actually it would be challenging for me to make something with symmetrical, with a central, with the tree right in the center. Just in terms of actually working on this is one of the hardest ones I've made, just because, the tree it's actually kind of grafted together by me, not by it's like kind of grafted together. Like I took a dead espalier tree and then attached living branches that I got from an orchard, Rose Hill Farm, one of my favorite places in the world. And there's a really wonderful farmer there who trades with me for apple boughs and things. But in this one also, I felt like I wanted to challenge myself to have that ground, but to have there be more integration between the ground and the sky. So whereas the other ones that have the sort of fake ground, it's like there's the ground and then there's the sky. In this, I wanted there even just tonally to be more continuity between them, so that in a detail like this, you could see like that, like the tone here of the sky goes all the way down into the ground. And also thinking about kind of like almost like a monogram, it's interesting too in terms of photography, the way that these, I don't know what, often they seem to be night, but they can't really be night. They're taken in the day. But I think that sort of it's been very exciting to work with that. Like not that something kind of hovering or imprecise about the time of day, because that's something as a photographer, I often want that specificity of the light. Whereas in these, I'm sort of intentionally trying to almost withhold it, the specificity of time of day. Had to put a snake in this one. Sometimes I'm not allowed to use snakes, and other times I'm like, okay, one snake. So this is again just a few references that I was making. Oh yeah, see, look, I wrote snake. But I'll make little notes for myself, like too crowded. Don't forget to. I can't read what that said. Oh, to remove. I think I had some leaf there that was holding something together, but had to remove. Of course, add porcelain berries, right? So it's like I'll make all these little notes for myself. Fix this, fix that, too straight, more apples there, less there. And that's and then the last piece, this is the last, there's actually more. I hope you guys are okay. But this is the last of the large pieces that I just finished printing, but I shot it in the fall. This is number 9. That's just how they're titled. And I think that the passage of making this piece was just particularly exciting because I think it's just like, it's so incredible to me that I can sort of I don't mean like that I amaze myself kind of thing. I don't mean that. I mean that I can start in one place and just how much evolution there is in where I began. So I wanted to just make a piece that was just, I know sometimes I'm like talking about, oh no, in this I'm foregrounding light. I wanted to just make a piece that was just entirely bleak, empty nests, empty eggshells, just total, like a blasted, hopeless, dark fucking world, right? Which I think we can all understand, right? Like we can understand that. But as I started to think about what I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to use my collection of nests, which I've been, collecting them for, years and years. People give them to me. I find them on the ground. But I was starting to work on the frame, and there were just like a few little green things growing in there. And I was about to pull them out. And I was like, hell, what is it? Like I was like, oh, all right. Like maybe it doesn't have to be quite so damn bleak. And then the piece kind of went in a different direction. It was a particularly obsessional piece where I wanted to have as many sizes and shapes of eggs as I could. I found a place that had fresh ostrich eggs that I bought. I got some quail eggs. I even, the day of my father-in-law's funeral, I bought an overpriced thing of eggs from some fancy place on the Upper East Side for $18 because I felt like I really needed some more smaller eggs. I found all these incredible farms all over Ulster County so I could get duck eggs, goose eggs, and then once I saw those few little shoots, I was like, I have to, I don't know, lean into it. So I have a little indoor garden where I grow microgreens and things. So I started filling the eggs with little bits of dirt and seeds. I filled the nests with some dirt and seeds and started, growing things in the nest, in the eggs, and then collecting eggs, collecting mushrooms. At this time that I was working on this piece was during Hurricane Ian. So the whole sort of form of the nest as a kind of hurricane, a kind of microcosm, macrocosm thing was really, really on my mind. I was looking at a lot of these images. I was seeing what direction they go to make sure, my piece was accurate. An accurate version of the hurricane. And then other little obsessional things I'll share. I knew that there was a little island, or someone mentioned to me that near Barrytown where I live, there's an island called Goose Island. So I'm like, oh my God, we have to go there and get goose eggs. Picturing that I'm going to get out of my kayak, right? And there's just going to be all these goose eggs. So here we are, kayaking to Goose Island. Oh, there, I turned the camera because it was an amazing heron. So my husband's here, and he's he went with me on this trip. It was super, super fun trip. So do you think that I found hundreds of goose eggs? I did find, but it was a really important trip because while I might not have come back with a whole bunch of eggs, I did get really interested in the surface of the water and the way that this duckweed, if that is what it is, kind of connected. There were sort of blobs and clusters, and then there'd be a really long tendril. So I ended up heaping up mounds and mounds of it on my lap in the kayak, and they're in the piece. I did not get this. I did find a couple of broken eggshells, and those are in the piece. So it wasn't, and I found some other really beautiful berries and things. Another just recurring theme is this, the Garden of Earthly Delights. But in this case, I started reading this art history book about Bosch and about this painting. And there was one passage which really, really helped me that had to do with this one uncracked egg at the center of the painting. I printed this out for myself, just that same letter size thing. And I had it out with me as I was composing. And this is just a little page from my notebook where I jotted down this key idea of a kind of mystical vanishing point. Through this timeless symbol of an unhatched egg, Bosch offers us a way out of his troubled work, or world, work. The hope of birth that's evermore about to be. So that actually was I don't know what to call it. It was sort of I know it's invisible in the work, it's not something you'd see, but there is in fact one black uncracked egg in the very center of my piece. And it's sort of a non-event. But for me, in terms of kind of organizing the thing, it was very, very important. Usually I sort of avoid the center like the plague. Like the last thing I want is someone's eye to like land in the center and then kind of be stuck there. But I felt like there was something about this allegorically that was so powerful to me. And also the idea of a vanishing point, which isn't a vanishing point spatially, but that it's like almost like a psychological one, this uncracked egg. Other notes here, like it was very important to me to have some of the nests seen from a bird's eye view. It's kind of fun. And then others tilted, like where they would be an ellipse, right? And using the different, working on the frame to be able to have some of that spatial complexity. Yeah, and wanting to have the question of gravity, using the mushrooms as ledges, needing an eyedropper for the yolks, right? These are all kind of the things, because I had saved all the yolks from the eggs that I was painting and burning and growing things in, and then later put them back into the piece, thinking about blood and yolk coming out of the eggs. And then here are some of my notes about things I needed to do as the thing was unfolding. And then here are some details. The details are important because it's pretty hard to see. You can't really see them. In some of the eggs are kind of birthing little mice. And the mice are sort of partly being born and partly dead. You're not really sure whether it's the blood of death or the blood of birth. And I kind of wanted it to be where any one place that you might settle in would feel like almost like its own little world. Like if you've ever seen that film from ages ago, Silent Running, where he's like, Bruce Dern is up there with that little pod of the last few plants left. You remember that? Anyway, kind of like that, where there's just like clusters that are all connected and attached, right? There's another little mouse in there. And I ended up planting seeds on the frame itself. So you could see like this cluster of green here that follow the sort of compositional structure of the piece, right? So I planted the seeds like the way I kind of wanted the eye to move, different colors of things, watercress, amaranth, different things that would make different color shoots. On the day of the shoot, I added the yolks back into different sections. So you could see here, there's also a snake in there. Some of them very drippy, some of them whole. I like this little spot here where there's like the shoots really, these like purple and green shoots coming out of the eggshell. And then alongside these large works, I've been working on out in the landscape, not totally unlike the way I worked in Fallen, and also making films, which no one has seen. Let's see, I can get rid of that. There. So these are just clips of of footage that I'm working with. Questions of how they'll be seen, whether I don't want them on a monitor. I know that. I like them projected onto black, but exactly how they'll be seen, I'm not sure yet. Some of these were made on my phone and are like really, really crunchy and low res. And at first I was like, oh, yuck. And then over January, I sort of set aside like a little artist residence for myself to really focus on this question. And I decided I really like it, and that how eventually things will, what a viewer would see and when, I have to really keep in mind, but so that like language shift, right? It's like a shift in vocabulary, how to work with that. We'll come back to a couple more films maybe. This is almost like a fruitless, but not really. So I'm using lights, often photographing at twilight or at night. And I'm just going to kind of go through these. I want to make sure we have time for questions. Also, if you do have questions as we're going, that's totally fine. One of my favorite, I feel like this is going to, maybe I won't tell you. I was going to tell you about my favorite thing to light on fire. But yeah.
Is it possible for you to go to the side and still, like, all the way over?
Then I can't press.
You don't have a remote on it. Okay.
No. But if I'm here, is that any better?
It's good for me.
Worse-
I don't know about the rest
worse
of
for you?
people.
These are also pretty elaborate, but not, 6 weeks or 2 months elaborate. It's more like thinking about what I want to do, casing out places where I want to work, planning it, and then having some combination of something that's planned and something that's highly improvisational that happens in how I'm photographing here. Often I'll be out for many, many hours, and then it seems like the light is really amazing for 6 minutes at twilight. And at first I was like, wow, look at that blue cast. These are too blue. But of course in Photoshop, you can like take that out instantly, and then all of a sudden the magic is gone, right? But I usually do dial it back a bit. Usually it's like still needs a little, but it isn't as yeah, like if you look at my screen, oh no, I better not do that. One of the really exciting things that I find about working like this is that, like, here I am, I'm out on the night of the full moon in an orchard with the blossoms, with like these gold snakes and apples. This print actually still needs like some tweaking, but I'm always sort of amazed that even if I'm setting something up, I still feel like I'm seeing it, like I'm surprised. And it's just very exciting way to work. This one is called Portent. I guess I often want it to feel like the viewer has kind of almost stumbled upon something that is kind of not right, is uncanny or beautiful, but also usually quite alarming. This was a poor owl that was hit by a car that I've worked with in a few pieces. I also am working with questions that have to do with the blue of twilight. Then there's sometimes I'm using a blue light. And then sometimes in the films, I've started making the films blue. And I'm just saying right now, it's like a totally open question how that's going to work out. Another thing that's a little bit new is that I've been exploring working with some of the same material that's on my frame and seeing what happens when I kind of work with it then out in the landscape. So some of the eggs, the birds, the nests floating around a little pond that I was actually just at this past weekend photographing in the ice. And then, lighting fires. And I love this place actually because it's so amazing that there's sort of a moment where the light sort of dissolves. So the surface of the water sort of dissolves and you don't see it so much as the surface. So it has a kind of like beautiful ambiguity of the space. This was during that astonishing ice storm that we had last February, where I was pretty much outside 24/7. Again, just freezing, but also setting things up, like set this up and then let the birds kind of ice into this sweet autumn clematis, which did not survive the ice. This one I made a couple of days ago. So this one I photographed Saturday, I think. Remember how cold it was? So actually, no, I photographed. I started working on. I had been working on it for about a week, like trying to make this whole thing happen with composing, like under the surface of the ice and on top. And then by the time then it got so frozen solid, I couldn't actually even access underneath the ice. But then I found this place where there was like water dripping. And so I brought some things to leave there overnight, apples and birds and things like that, to kind of ice in, and then went back again on Sunday to photograph. I'm not at all convinced that this is like the picture. There's many others, but I thought it would be kind of fun to share something that was as recent as a couple of days ago. Probably either this one or the other one with the horizontal fire will have to go. Like, I'm not sure you can really have two of these horizontal fires. Another totally brand new one. So this is where I excavated one of the birds that I had put in the ice, but then it cracked, and then I photographed it just on the surface of the ice. This is on Sunday. And again, there's other versions of this with fire, and I don't know yet, but I just thought it would be kind of fun. And then here are just several films that I've been exploring, a few just little clips of films, of footage that I'm working with. One thing I don't do yet, because I feel like change, for me, like working with time feels like, in this new way, feels like such a damn big deal. Like, I've always been amazed that, like, you know, photographers like, oh yeah, now I'm working in video, and I'm like, wow, like how, you know, like, how do you do that? Like, it just feels like, for me, like, I usually have such tight parameters, and I've kind of opened up my parameters more than usual in this body of work. Like, I've, you know, large things, medium-sized things, different aspect ratios. I have really small works, and then also working with film, but I haven't yet moved the camera. I feel like that's so far been, I haven't really been interested in that so far, really just interested in the motion, the movement that's in front of me, as opposed to my motion. I don't know yet about sound. I've been making some recordings, but I'm not quite sure what will happen there. But I do like the idea of, I mean, I often, I think as I've gotten older as an artist, I really think about the viewer. And I feel like there could be something really powerful for the viewer about, you know, even this piece here, as something to kind of encounter or be inside of in some way. I'm in the wrong one, but that's okay. There are also questions I have about how different the landscape can be, right? Like this was made at the top of a crater on an island in Sicily. So it's like, can you move from these different landscapes. I'm not sure yet. And then the last video here, I'll just strings several together, but again, just an experiment. So one of the things that I've been thinking about with these pieces is that probably ultimately I would not want a viewer to encounter the same image like in the video as in a still. And I'll just have to make some difficult decisions. We're all familiar with that. So this is kind of just where I'm at. So just a few more images. This is from the very last part of the series called Emblem, which are more, not this, I wish, more kind of diagrammatic and simple, and the prints are small. I have not been working as much on this section in the last, I would say, like 5 months or so as the other sections. So I feel like it's sort of laid fallow, and it's sometimes good to do that, because then when I came back to it, I was like, knew exactly which ones I thought were good and which ones were weak and why. But this is kind of more the material that I'm drawing upon. These are some of the little kind of almost like film still notes that I have on my studio wall. I don't know whether I would do anything with that as it is. And in these two, I'm playing a little bit with video, but still, I don't think I'd have it so choppy. And all kinds of questions of editing are still open. But these may, play a part in the whole series. Just looking at the time. Let me see if oh yeah, you don't want to miss that part where I almost burned my face off. Back to the stills. This is another video, but I kind of feel like time-wise, I'd like to have more time for discussion. I think I will skip this one too. Just kind of come to a close here. This is the last one from Emblem. And then I'll end with playing this, but I think we can also open it up to questions while this one is playing. Although I like this one, I think. So, thank you for your attention. It's funny with video, I think that I know if I feel antsy, like I know when I go to a museum and I see that something's 17 minutes, I'm just like, do not have it in me, so I'm really thinking about that, like what it asks of the viewer to have that time piece. I feel bad for the poor people standing back there. Any questions?
For your videos, what were you shooting on, and what was it, the sound that was just on whatever camera, or did you have a microphone?
So I'm shooting with 3 different things, so there's either my phone, was for a while earlier on was the Fuji GFX 50S, and then now I have the 100S. So it's one of those 3 cameras. The sound was made separately with a little handheld microphone recorder, and wasn't at all continuous with the thing, with that experiment of the videos that were strung together. Yeah.
Do you see the sound always being nature, or would it be a manufactured sound that like manufactured?
I wish I could answer that. I don't think I would have I might have no sound. Like right now, what I'm really into are like tinted silent films. I love those. And I might have no sound. So I guess I'm really not sure. I mean, there was something I watched and it was like kind of incredible, and it had something by like the Kronos Quartet, and I was like, wow, that would be cool. And then I was like, no, like it just, I don't know. So in the experiment with the sound, one of the things I liked was when it sort of seemed like it might be ambient sound, but it isn't quite. So I feel like there's some possibility there, but I'm really not sure. I feel like such a nursery school when it comes to this, like the sheer number of variables there, Yeah. If you have any ideas, though, you can do it. Yeah.
So in the earlier work, you were out with a tripod and a camera, and you were finding things to photograph. And then as your work progressed, you started to elaborately compose. And then as it got later, you were not only composing, you were painting. And at one point, it really felt like you almost became like a painter. And I'm just curious about, for you, that process
Yeah.
of going from, the finding photographer to the actual making, that sort of growth. Because it's quite evident, and you amazingly handled it with like no shock or change. It was like you just like, okay, I'm a painter.
I'm not a painter.
But you did physically paint gold allium, right? I mean,
But it's different. It's different because I'm not making paintings. I'm not making. No, I'm really not making paintings. And actually, it's really, I don't know if I should admit this, but I can't stand it when someone tells me something's painterly. I just feel like it's sort of like it's preferencing painting as to say it's a compliment that something is painterly. And I think I know what they mean, and I know it's good intention, so it's not like I'm like, well, thanks for that, whatever. But also, I mean, just in terms of the chronology of this, like Fortune, like those ones that I'm making out in the world, which are still partly about like finding something.
looks like you've gone all the way back. Yeah.
Composing are made alongside the ones that I'm making on the frame that are more painted, say. So I love the conversation between them. Like they're occasionally, like early on, I was like, are these two separate projects? And then I really don't think so. I think under this big umbrella, this idea of a kind of creation of a world that's in the world, but also partly composed and partly found. I think that, I guess I think like so much of photography gets delineated in terms of whether you're sort of a farmer or a hunter, right? Remember that? Are you a hunter or a farmer? And I love the idea of just that you really don't have to pick, and that even hunters are farming and farmers are hunting. It's so much more, that relationship is so much more dynamic. Like the idea that you're a photographer that constructs something and you make these tableaux versus a photographer, right? Like you can, I know we can all think of people who might represent those extremes, and that's real. But I guess what I'm saying is I love the really complicated in-between space. I really love the complicated in-between space of that. So, yeah, but I know what you mean. I am, it's like you have a lot of pains. But, oh, yeah, Sarah.
So I love something that you said in the beginning part where you talked about the all at onceness. At that moment in the chronology you presented, I really felt like that revealed something to me about you and your heart. And so I'm just holding on to that, and I just want to say thank you for that. And even I think that applies to painting and photography and this kind of all at once, despite your taste for painterly or not. But I wanted to ask about something entirely different, which is those letter size printouts. Do those play a part in this beyond just paper?
I don't think so. Yeah. I think they just are a tool, and have a really helpful role, but wouldn't be something that would be seen outside of a discussion, perhaps about process. That all at onceness thing. This is one of the things that's so nice. About doing something like this is it does help to kind of clarify, or thinking about like what is so central to what I feel like I'm trying to do. And I think the thing I said earlier, there is so much of that, and the idea that something could be really like upsetting, but also really, really beautiful. And that could be all at once, or that some experience of the sublime is also very much linked to terror, and to like a kind of extreme humility in the face of something really powerful. And yeah. I was going to say something. Oh yeah, I wanted to just say something about I think we all had experiences early on in the pandemic, especially up here, where we felt the pause in the traffic, in everything. And I feel like I'm always out there in the streams and the ice, but those experiences of the natural world during lockdown were some of the most extraordinary experiences ever. It was like I heard things I never heard before. I saw things I never saw before, even just purely, truly creatures that I never saw before. And I really held on to that. And as we've lost it and recovered, or are recovering, I feel like it's coupled with a profound sense of loss, because there was that feeling of ease in the natural world, or at least a little ease, and then having the sounds ramp up and the busyness ramp up and our schedule, and then it just, So I just wanted to say that about like being out there during that time.
I just wanted to make a comment about something that I felt when I was watching the videos that were stitched together with the sound. The bird floating on the water, and it was partly the way it went, but it was so sad. It just really brought up a lot of sadness that came out of the last 3 years for me, and death. And it was beautiful. And then the next scene was the horizontal fire, which was also very beautiful. I actually liked the video. That was more evocative for me than the still, but it also felt like fire can be like for death, but it also was very hopeful and warm. So I just wanted to give you that.
Thank you. No, the bird was something I kind of just refound. Like as I was like, what am I doing with video? And then I was like, oh, what videos have I made? You know, and I was like, I didn't even really know. Like in a way that I'm really, really good at keeping up with my printing. You know, if I go and shoot, and it's like I make work prints and then I make big prints, and I'm always doing it. And I make 5 by 10 foot work prints in my studio because I have to see it. And my process of working with video is not quite that, and I realized just how much it really needs to be. So the bird piece was a piece I sort of rediscovered. And at first I had thought, oh, these are all just too low res or whatever, but then I like the language of it, and it is kind of a little simple and it's melancholy, but I think it is really felt. So maybe it'll stay in there.
Okay, I just wanted to also comment on something that was said a little bit earlier, which was, or that you, I don't remember what the context was exactly, but you were talking about, when you said the word tapestry, and so, and I was really seeing that type of like tapestry and what you were doing and the way, and on the scale of which you were making these, and the way that they did remind me of almost like wall hangings in some way, because there's something like tactile or something with that fiber, or the way that you're using all these different materials to create a tactile experience, while even though it's flat. So on one hand it's flat because it's paper, but you're creating this like tactile world of which like a tapestry would be in that. So I just wanted to comment on that. But I did want to ask you, and I'm almost afraid, because I use the word painterly sometimes. Sometimes I do. But so my question is I really see a lot of mystical feeling or magical. Those words are really crazy too, and I hesitate to use them. But there is a sense of magic or spiritual or mystical that I see in your pictures, and I think it's what you're doing with the light and the dark and the contrast between them. And I just want to know if that's intentional or where do you feel you are with that exactly?
That's really hard. No, that's a really, really good question, because I think I evade it a little bit when I talk, because it's almost like such a big part of the work that I don't almost know what to say. And I do think but see, there I fall, I don't know what word to use. I really don't know what word to use. I don't know whether I want to say like mystical or magical or like any of those words, but I mean, if I'm honest, I absolutely am trying to, and actually when I'm working, I feel like there's this thing that happens where if I'm open enough, some weird combination of like total openness, rigor, which seem like they're opposite, but I feel like they're sort of part of each other. And have some sense of intention, but also some kind of like extreme flexibility, that I can become part of some force. See, that sounds so stupid. Sorry, it just sounds really dumb. Like you feel like you're in some kind of parody of an art talk or something like that. Or like I'm part of the flow. I'm like, but it really does. That is like an incredibly powerful feeling to feel like, and I feel like there's hubris in it and there's humility in it all at the same time, that I feel like I get to sort of like get into the current. Like I feel like I can be pulled with the current of whatever it is. And I think one of the reasons why the work, whether it's being out in the woods collecting things, being in a stream in the ice, like I feel like it's a kind of contact with something which is so physical in the natural world, or in the world, because the natural world, there's like the natural world and then there's the not natural world. I don't know if that's really the case, but with the world, and so, oh God, I lost my thought. It was like that.
You're in the current.
In the current, and then the natural world is in the world. I'm sorry, there was like some point that I was going to make, and it just like completely yeah, I don't know what it was. I'm sorry. It'll probably come to me in a minute, but it, about the, like, I guess the humility and the hubris of it, I feel like feels really real, because I often really do feel like, oh my God, like, I can't believe, oh, I know what I was talking about. So the contact, I know what I wanted to say, was that on one hand, it's like so tangible and so physical. But really what I feel like is happening is that I'm able to kind of like palpate something which is really unknown. And that's why I feel like the thing about a picture which seems hyper-resolved to the point where there might not be room for that, like even if it's comets and snakes rising up out of a fictional ground, that can be a little over-resolved, right? And then maybe the next picture is more open and has that space for the unknown. And that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So does that mean in your own work, when it's completed, you still like to be surprised when you look at it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. And I think, yeah. You had a question before.
I did, yeah. It was following on about the woodpecker floating, and was it my imagination? I'm not a photographer myself. Was it my imagination, or but you either moved or you
I did.
Did you physically move, or did you just zoom in on it?
So most of them, even when I'm using my phone, like this one, my phone is on a tripod.
Right.
With a couple of the videos, including the bird, that was just handheld. It was when I wasn't even really thinking that I was making videos.
Right.
Right. I did move.
No, but so it was interesting, because I think that was actually what was shocking, having seen all of these images developing, having seen photographs of you inside the process, as we've all watched you do that, and then actually that was the first moment that somehow you came into the presence of it, and it was quite jarring, and I think it had also affected the kind of why it was so moving to come move in so close and have the bird just flipping in the water, and it wasn't just the water moving. I don't know, just as a comment, because it really struck me when it happened that you were suddenly there.
Yeah.
The way you had, of course you're there the whole time,
Yeah.
but that you hadn't been there for us as the viewers.
I appreciate that, sharing that perception. Yeah, because there is something about the unmoving eye which might be a little bit impersonal, and that's a quality. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's bad, right?
Not at all.
But it could
Very,
be
just different. It's
different,
just
exactly
different.
different.
It was
but
theatrical in a whole
interesting.
different way.
Yeah.
I mean, what you do is very
Yeah.
theatrical, but
Yeah.
that was different theatrical.
Yeah. like in this, I like the moments where there's this like fogginess, and that's my breath. What is, it's 2 degrees. I always think it's amazing too, like digital photography is so incredible, but it's also just like such a hothouse flower. Like it's like you take it in the heat, it overheats. I take it in the cold, the batteries die in 4 seconds, my tripod freezes, and it's like, I'm still here, and I am like flesh, you know? So can't you, like, you know, I have to bring hand warmers, and then I'm like trying to warm up my gear, you know, with the hand warmers. It's, I need somebody, it's the fingers, I always am, like, I always.
Pain is temporary. Until it's frostbite, then it's not funny anymore.
It's not funny, I know. I just want to thank everyone for listening and looking. Yeah, so much.
That was incredible. Each week, I don't know about all you, but I've been introduced to new work and new people, and it's just so, it feels so good to be surrounded by people, be meeting other like-minded artists, and sort of expanding our community. So if you like what you heard tonight, please sign up for our newsletter, become a member, just stop by and say hi. We love to see you in here, and we look forward to having a little more space in the future. So I appreciate, but it's a beautiful crowd. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you to Tanya for such an in-depth and beautiful look into your work. Thank you.